Hello and welcome to my Good News Africa. So this is Mabinda TV, where I look at the top issues in Africa, in Kenya, Africa, and around the world. So for now, Kalonzo Musyoka has trademarked Kalonzo 2027. That is, Kalonzo Musyoka has trademarked Kalonzo 2027. So what do you think it portends? So basically, Kalonzo Musyoka will be on the ballot. That's the surest indication. He trademarked Kalonzo 2027 in March. So basically, that shows you that Kalonzo intends very much to be on the ballot. So I'm sure this is something that a lot of this is something that a lot of Kenyans will be keen on. So Kalonzo Musyoka has trademarked Kalonzo 2027, and so we'll see. We will see whether that will mean he will run for the presidency. I think, for all intents and purposes, Kalonzo Musyoka is the favorite candidate to be the United Opposition candidate. That is Kalonzo Musyoka will be the united opposition candidate. So that is something that I think we must expect. That is Kalonzo Musyoka to be the united opposition presidential flag bearer. So of course you have Kalonzo Musyoka, and then of course then the other issue will be the running mate. Who will be the running mate to Kalonzo Musyoka? So you have and that is you have Fred Matiang'i, you have Edin Sifuna, and then you have another running mate position called Go to Gachagua. So basically, among these three, who do you think will Kalonzo Musyoka choose to be his running mate for the 2027 poll? So basically, Kalonzo Musyoka could choose Matiang'i. Remember, Matiang'i came to the limelight during the Uhuru era. Basically, Fred Matiang'i was the one minister that basically Fred Matiang'i was the one minister that was the de facto prime minister. He coordinated for all intents and purposes. He was the one running the Uhuru government. That is Fred Matiang'i, and of course, he is the crisis mode of a leader. That is Fred Matiang'i. I could compare him to the late Tanzanian president John Pombe Magufuli, where a crisis mode of leaders come in when there is a crisis, and then they attempt and find a solution to whatever is facing their people. So basically, crisis mode of leaders are built that way. So Kalonzo Musyoka could choose Fred Matiang'i because of his improved track record. Remember, Fred Matiang'i came to the limelight because of his crackdown on cheating in national exams. So basically, during Matiang'i's era, he reduced the number of A's from to 141. Basically, only 141 candidates got A's during Matiang'i's time. And of course, some schools in the previous year, 2015, had about 200 A's, and that to reduce that whole number of A's to just 141, then that shows you that Matiang'i was really cracked down hard on exam cheating, and of course, many Kenyans see him as a performer. Of course, the tribal leanings, he comes from the Kisii community. Of course, the Kisii community does not have a lot of votes. I think they have maybe 1 million votes. I think the last time we had a presidential candidate from the Kisii community was Simeon Nyachae, who was the kingpin of the Gusii people. Of course, he got only 5% in the 2002 election. Of course, he wasn't happy with the idea that Raila Odinga had chosen Simeon Nyachae, had chosen Mwai Kibaki. Remember Kibaki torture moment of Raila Odinga. So basically, that is Fred Matiang'i for you. So basically, he could be the running mate to Kalonzo Musyoka, and of course, he will bring in the much needed reforms. He could also be admired by the Gen Zs. A lot of Gen Zs remember Matiang'i came in during the Gen Z protests. That is when his name was floated up for maybe as the Gen Z candidate. The Gen Z say they are leaderless, but of course they need a leader to be able to negotiate on their own terms in politics. If you are not on the table, then your terms cannot be negotiated. That's just it. If you are not on the table in politics, then your terms cannot be negotiated. So you had Fred Matiang'i coming in as the leader of the Gen Zs during the 2024 Gen Z's protest. But of course, then they'll have to look. Of course, it's not just your work ethic. Remember, Kenya is a deeply tribal society. We vote based not on how a minister works, not on the ideology of the presidential candidate, not on the issues of the or manifesto of the presidential candidate. We vote based on tribe, and the tribal calculation for Kalonzo Musyoka will be that the tribal calculation for Kalonzo Musyoka will be that yes, he is of the right age, he is of the right time, and that is how then Kalonzo Musyoka could and that is how Kalonzo Musyoka could come in. So basically, that's it about Kalonzo Musyoka. I just think he will introduce either Fred Matiang'i, of course, a performer, no doubt. Then, of course, he will have another running mate, that is Edwin Sifuna. Of course, he is also a performer, that is Edwin Sifuna. Is also a performer. So basically, then that is how we could. That is how we could improve the presidency of Kalonzo Musyoka. That is how we could improve the presidency of Kalonzo Musyoka. So basically, uh, I just think that basically what we need to be doing, what we need to be doing right now, is just to see how Kalonzo Musyoka then will fare on. That is how then we will be able to know whether Kalonzo Musyoka is a formidable candidate. But I think the great lesson to learn here that Kenyans vote along tribal lines, and Kalonzo Musyoka is 72 years old, so he will not have another time in order to run for the presidency. This is his last chance. Of course, he has been the running mate to Raila Odinga 3 times: 2013, 2017, and of course in 2022 he stepped aside, and of course then Raila Odinga ran with a ticket on Martha Karua. Of course, some say Raila Odinga should not have banked on the Mount Kenya vote, should have gone with a Kalonzo deputy running mate ticket. But of course, the support from Uhuru was that Mount Kenya person must be the running mate. So basically, we see, of course, Gachagua will also be deeply looking at that ticket. Gachagua right now is looking at basically he was impeached, so I'm not sure whether he is allowed to run at all. But remember, Mount Kenya is going to remember Kenyan politics is stable. So if Mount Kenya does not have a candidate at the top of the ticket, basically they will. If Mount Kenya does not have a candidate at the top of the ticket, then basically they will just not vote for Kalonzo. So basically, that complicates the tribal arithmetic for Kalonzo Musyoka, because remember, Mount Kenya has a running mate in Kithure Kindiki, Professor Kithure Kindiki, in William Ruto, and of course, William Ruto knows he has lost the Mount Kenya vote. So basically, Ruto will be looking to fill up the Mount Kenya vote. Of course, he knows without the Mount Kenya vote, then basically he will not get the presidency. That is what enabled him to become president. Near 90% of the votes in Mount Kenya, of course, that is what drowned out Raila Odinga. Even after Raila Odinga led in six of the eight provinces, but then William Ruto saw it off with a win in Rift Valley and a win in Mount Kenya. So basically, for William Ruto, he will be looking at extending the voting patterns in Mount Kenya. Of course, that is Gachagua is likely to emerge as the kingpin of Mount Kenya. Of course, there will be last minute defections. I think there will be last minute defections, and so we should be waiting to see various people defect during the last minute. You have Anwar Guru apologizing to Rigathi Gachagua over. You have Anwar Guru apologizing to Rigathi Gachagua over his impeachment. But of course, and then we will see as this took and jostle the last minute. Remember, politics, a day is a lifetime in politics. Basically, a day is a lifetime in politics, and so this is why then there will be so much gerrymandering. We will be looking at a lot of arithmetic going on into the final days of the presidency. Remember, Kibaki was chosen in September, was selected in September when elections were about to be held in December. So he had only 3 months to campaign, and I think the united opposition will want to wait as long as possible before they can have a formidable ticket for Kalonzo Musyoka, Kalonzo Matiang'i, Kalonzo Sifuna, and Kalonzo Gachagua. Of course, in polling, recent polling by TIPA shows that Kalonzo Musyoka is leading with shows Kalonzo Musyoka is leading with that is 20. Ruto is leading with 24% of the vote. And then you have Kalonzo at 19%, Matiang'i at 14%. And then you have who is the other one? You have Sifuna at 10%, Gachagua at 9%. So that's how these candidates are faring on, and I think. This will tighten, the rest will tighten, and of course, for William Ruto, that will spell fear a disaster for him, because if the opposition unites, then he will have a very difficult path to the presidency, and I think that is how then we could look at that ticket. That is how we could look at that ticket. That is the Kalonzo Musyoka ticket. That is how we could look at that ticket. So bye for now till the next episode. Bye for now.